Nobody came. Not because she had no one. She had people. A church full of them. Friends who loved her. A family who was proud of her. Nobody came because she had not told anyone it was her birthday. She had done everything they told her to do. She prayed. She waited. She kept her standards when every voice around her said to lower them. She watched friend after friend walk down an aisle, hold a baby, build a life, and she smiled for every one of them. She was not bitter. She was faithful. And then she turned 34. She sat at her kitchen table alone. The birthday cake in front of her had one candle. And nobody had lit it. For the first time in years, she let herself ask the question she had been too afraid to say out loud. God, am I being faithful? Or am I just hiding? It is not a story about timing. It is a story about what happens when a woman who has done everything right finally finds the courage to ask God what he is actually trying to do in her. There is a verse in Psalm 139, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." Naomi had been praying those words for years. She did not yet understand what she was asking for. If you have ever confused waiting with hiding, stay until the end. She was 34. She was a nurse working night shifts at a hospital in Atlanta. Patients asked for her by name. Not because she was the most experienced, but because the way she showed up made people feel less afraid. She led a Bible study group every Thursday evening. She helped set up chairs before Sunday service and stayed to put them away. She brought food to new mothers in her church without being asked. She remembered birthdays of people who had long forgotten hers. But here is what none of that showed: she had been running on fumes for years, and nobody could tell. Because the woman doing all of it had slowly, quietly, stopped letting herself want anything for herself. She had done it the way you turn down a lamp, not all at once, just a little at a time, until the room is so dark you forget it was ever bright. That spring, her closest friend from nursing school got engaged. Naomi helped plan the party. She arranged the flowers. Made the music playlist. She stood at the back of the room and clapped for every gift, with the right smile on her face. She was happy for her friend. That was true. But in the car on the way home, stopped at a red light on an empty road late at night, something came up inside her. Not jealousy. Something quieter and harder to name. A sadness for the part of herself she had quietly buried. The part that once believed, without any doubts, that love was coming. The light turned green. Naomi drove home. She washed her face, said her prayers, and went to sleep. She did not write about it in her journal. Some things, she had learned, are too easy to break if you put them into words. That night, for the first time in 8 years of faithful living, she did something she had never let herself do. She got angry. Not out loud. She would not have dared. But in the dark of her bedroom, with the city quiet outside, she felt it rise in her chest like something she had been holding under water for years. She had done everything right. She had waited. She had believed. And she was still here, alone at 34, helping other people celebrate lives that looked nothing like her own. She did not sleep that night. In the morning, she felt ashamed of her anger, and then ashamed of that shame. This was the cycle she had been in for years without ever naming it. She had spent so long being the woman no one worried about that she had stopped being honest, even with herself. Even with God. And somewhere under the shame, she knew, that was the real problem. Not the waiting. The silence. His name was Caleb. He went to a church on the other side of the city. They met through mutual friends at a conference in February. He was a high school history teacher, thoughtful, easy to talk to, the kind of man who asked follow-up questions and remembered what you said. Naomi was not looking. That mattered to her later. She had simply come to a community conference. He was standing near the coffee table looking a little lost, holding a paper cup. She asked if he needed help finding the registration desk. It felt, for a moment, like a small gift. They talked for 2 hours. He texted her that evening, one line, thanking her for the conversation, saying it was the best part of his day. She read it 3 times. The first 3 months were steady. Not exciting, steady. He called when he said he would. He made plans and kept them. He asked about her patients, remembering details from stories she had almost forgotten she told. On their 4th date, at a small table near a window, they talked until the restaurant started stacking chairs around them. He had been reading a book about the civil rights movement in Atlanta. When she said she grew up near one of the churches in the book, he leaned forward and said, "Tell me what that was like." Not as small talk. As someone who really wanted to know. She drove home that night with the windows open, even though it was cold. But Caleb was not without edges. He could go quiet for days when something was weighing on him, not distant, but turned inward, hard to reach. He had strong opinions about things that did not matter. Once, when she told him about a patient she had lost, he started talking about himself before she had finished. He caught it, said sorry, asked her to go on, but she had seen it. The ordinary human part of him. She found, strangely, that she preferred those moments. They were easier to hold than the gentle ones. Because when he was kind, really kind, she did not know what to do with it. She kept waiting for something to go wrong. Every good moment had a shadow. Is this real, or is this the start of something that will hurt me? She said none of this to Caleb. For months in, Caleb mentioned he had lunch with an ex-girlfriend, someone from university, briefly in town, nothing important. He said it simply, the way people mention normal things. Naomi heard it differently. That night, all the fears she had been holding came up at once. She checked his social media. Told herself she was not checking. Checked again. When they spoke the next evening, she was very careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that shows distrust more clearly than any question would. Caleb noticed. He asked what was wrong. She said nothing was wrong. He pushed a little, not hard, but with a tiredness she could hear at the edges of his voice. He said, "Naomi. I can feel you disappearing. I don't know what I did." That landed hard. Because he had not done anything. And she could not explain that without explaining everything. By the end of the call, a small invisible distance had opened between them. Not because of what he did. But because of what she could not say. He had his own fear too, a past relationship that ended without explanation, a woman who went quiet before she left. He was not untouched either. He had just gone a little further in learning to say so. For the first time, she saw clearly, this was the pattern. Not his absence, but her armor. Not his failures, but her fear of his. She had been close to everyone in her life, Caleb, her friends, God, from behind glass. Present, but protected. Available, but not reachable. She had confused guarding her heart with closing it. It happened on a Thursday in November, after a shift that had broken her in the ordinary way difficult shifts do. A patient she had cared for 6 weeks had taken a sudden turn. She drove home in silence, her hands still. She got home and did not take off her coat. She did not make tea. She did not open her Bible. She sat down on the floor of her apartment, not the couch, the floor, and she did not really pray. She just became very still. She had been strong for so many years. She had served, and prayed, and smiled, and waited. And she was tired. Not of God. Not of faith. She was tired of the performance. Tired of being the woman who was always fine. She had been sitting there for a long time, turning over the same thoughts she always turned over, when something shifted. Not a voice. Not a vision. More like a question she had been avoiding her whole life, finally making itself impossible to ignore. You are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of being truly known, and found wanting. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about her prayers. For years she had prayed, God, bring him. God, open the door. God, show me the sign. She had never once prayed, God, show me what is inside me that I am too afraid to look at. Remember the question from the very beginning of this video, what was she really afraid of? Here is the answer. It was not loneliness. It was not being single. It was this, she was afraid that if someone got close enough, really close, they would see her completely. And they would decide she was not worth staying for. So she had never let anyone get that close. Not Caleb. Not her friends. Not even God, even though she spoke to him every day. She had not been trusting God's timing. She had been hiding behind it. There is a verse she had memorized as a girl, Isaiah 43 verse 19, Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? She had always read it as a promise about what was coming. That night, she understood it differently. The new thing was not ahead of her. It was already happening. She had simply been looking past it. That night, Naomi prayed differently. She did not ask God for a husband. She did not ask for patience or for a sign that her time was coming. Instead, she asked a question she had never let herself ask before. God, what are you trying to build in me, that I keep interrupting? She did not get an answer in words. But something shifted. A heaviness she had carried so long she had stopped feeling it began, slowly, to lift. The next week, she told Caleb the truth. Not everything at once. Not perfectly. But she told him she was afraid. That she had been showing him a smaller, safer version of herself. That the distance he had probably felt was real. And it was not about him, it was about a fear she had been carrying for much longer than they had known each other. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I know. I felt it. I just didn't know if you wanted me to see it. He did not try to fix it. He did not make it about himself. He stayed with what she said long enough that she knew he had really hurt her. Then he told her something she did not expect. He said he understood more than she might think. After his last relationship ended, a woman who went quiet and then left without a real explanation, he had spent a year being overly careful. Always present, trying to be so reliable that no one would have a reason to leave. His warmth was real. But some of it, he said, was armor too. She had not seen that. She had been so focused on managing her own fear that she had not stopped to think, maybe he is managing his too. They sat with that for a while. Two people who had both been trying to be close from a safe distance, now really looking at each other. Before they said goodnight, he asked one question, what would it look like if you let yourself actually be here? She did not have an answer. But the question stayed. Driving home that night, she thought about all the times she had pulled away from his kindness, all the moments she had let pass without really receiving them. She realized she had been doing to Caleb what she had been doing to God, treating generosity as something to survive, not something to accept. In the months that followed, Naomi stopped organizing her life around an absence. She had been treating her present life like a waiting room, a temporary place until the real life could begin. She redecorated her apartment. Not because she was giving up on love, but because she deserved to live in a beautiful space right now. She painted one wall a deep terracotta orange. She hung two pictures she had been saving for a different version of her life. She bought the lamp she had seen 3 times in a shop window and talked herself out of each time. She said yes to a community garden project she had turned down twice. On the first Saturday she arrived not knowing anyone. By the 3rd week she was talking about plants with a retired teacher named Shirley, who had a laugh that made strangers feel welcome. She started running in the mornings. Not for discipline, but because moving helped her feel less like she was standing still. She kept her Bible study. But the conversations changed. She started being honest about her struggles, and found that the women around her had been carrying the same quiet weight in silence. She was not as alone as she had organized her life around being. Naomi had known Margaret from the church for 2 years, a quiet woman in her 60s who taught Sunday school and always seemed to be listening more than speaking. They had exchanged pleasantries, sat near each other at potlucks, prayed in the same circles. But Naomi had never really let her in. At a women's retreat that spring, Margaret stood up and said something that stayed in Naomi's chest. She had married at 41. Her husband was a widower she had met at a grief support group where she had come to volunteer, not to attend. She had not been looking. She had simply shown up to serve. "I spent my 30s praying for a husband," she said quietly. "And God kept answering a different prayer, one I hadn't thought to pray. He was making me someone I would want to be married to. I just wasn't watching that part." The room was very still. Naomi wrote those words in her journal that evening. She underlined them twice. She thought about all the times she had sat across from Margaret and said nothing real. The connection had been there the whole time. She had been waiting to feel safe enough to reach for it. She realized, with some sadness and some tenderness, that she had done this everywhere. Not just with Caleb. Not just with Margaret. She had been standing at the edge of her own life for years, waiting for permission to step fully into it. 6 months after Naomi told Caleb the truth about her fear, they were walking through a farmer's market on a Sunday morning, slowly, with coffee, arguing gently about whether cilantro was acceptable, when he stopped at a flower stand and bought her one wild yellow flower. No occasion. No explanation. He handed it to her and kept walking, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She looked at the flower in her hand and understood something she could not have named before that year. That love, when it is right, does not feel like being saved. It feels like company. Someone walking beside a life that is already moving, not filling an empty space, but joining a story already going. She was not better because he came. She had been becoming herself for months before that moment. The flower was just proof of what she already knew. She did not know, standing there, how the story would end. She still had hard days when the old fear came back, quick and familiar. But for the first time in years, she was not managing distance. She was actually there, present in a moment without pre-grieving the end of it. And that, she had come to understand, was what faith had been trying to teach her all along. Not to guarantee the outcome, but to be fully alive in the unfolding. Naomi still has hard days. Days when the old question rises, is this real, will this last, am I enough? But she has learned to name the fear now instead of wearing it. And naming it, she has found, takes away most of its power. She still prays. But her prayers sound different now. Less like requests, more like conversation. Less about what she is waiting for, and more about who she is becoming while she waits. She has found that those are not the same prayer. And that God, in His mercy, was always answering the better one. If you are in a waiting season, and you know who you are, I want to offer you something other than comfort. Not, your time is coming. But this, the time you are in right now is not a hallway. It is not a pause between chapters. It is not a problem to solve before your real life begins. It is your life. Happening right now. And God is not absent from it. He is in it, building something you may not see because you are looking past it, at what you are waiting for. The question is not when will it happen. The question is, who are you becoming while you wait? And are you willing to let God answer that, even if the answer surprises you? Even if what He builds in you is harder and more beautiful than what you were asking for? Because here is what I've learned from Naomi's story. Waiting is not the opposite of living. It never was. She had simply confused the two for a very long time. She was so focused on what was not there that she could not see what was. A life worth living, being built in her, while she stood still and called it faithfulness. When she stopped waiting to live, she found that love had room to arrive. I want to ask you something before you go. Not to subscribe. Not yet. Just this: what is one thing you have been telling yourself you'll do, when the right person arrives? When the season changes? When things finally feel settled? Write it in the comments. Just that one thing. Because I think you already know what God is trying to say to you. And I think this story was part of how He said it. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe, a new story comes every week.